This year, July 2023, in Botswana, Gaborone, we're going to host the US-Africa Business Summit organized by the US Corporate Council. And it's taking place more or less 6 months after President Biden convened a few dozen heads of state and government of African nations in the United States in December 2022 during the African Leaders Summit. The US-Africa Business Summit is an opportunity to take stock in terms of what has happened in the 6 months since. It's also taking place at a really crucial moment in time, as did already the Leaders Summit in December last year, in the sense that the geopolitical dynamics on the continent have changed significantly in the last 24 months. Just last week, we've had a bipartisan approach or bipartisan proposal to the USTR, the United States Trade Representative, to withdraw several benefits under AGOA, one of the trade benefits that the US offers to African nations in response to these allegations. So both the Leaders Summit in December last year as well as the Business Summit this year are taking place in this environment, and there are a number of other dynamics that are shaping the discussions. It's also important to note that many of the existing American-African partnerships are often seen as the extension of politics, a political arm. And in that sense, there's a big difference between how certain US interventions, including, for instance, the new Digital Transformation in Africa program by the United States, an $800 million program that was launched at the Africa Leaders Summit in December last year, how that is perceived compared to similar programs by other developed development partners, including, for instance, the German GIZ partner, who runs a very similar program also focused on digital transformation directly with the African Union. The other programs are often seen as technical cooperation directly supportive of the African agenda, whereas American programs are often seen as I said, a political instrument rather than a technical cooperation. The African Leaders Summit in the context of that was very eager to establish a direct alignment, and President Biden had directly outlined his Leaders Summit agenda in December last year, had directly aligned it with Agenda 2063 of the African Union. At the Business Summit in July in Gaborone, Botswana, we're going to see a very similar program. It's interesting to note that AGOA is not on the agenda, whereas the AFCFTA is. In that context, it's also important to note that many American firms have been trying to be relevant in the AFCFTA context, to engage and also to shape the AFCFTA, because it goes beyond just intra-African liberalization and goes to the point of actually liberalizing rules and regulations that are enabling trade but go beyond trade. And that includes very crucial protocols on intellectual property, on digital transformation, on digital trade and cross-border data flows, for instance, but also on a number of additional items, services, competition, investment, and so on and so on. The only thing I believe is remains to be said ahead of the summit is that we see the Business Summit also very strongly aligning with some of the emerging sectors that African countries have scoped out for themselves in terms of really accelerating development on the continent from a policy perspective, and that is both the energy transition on the one hand and digital transformation on the other hand. And there I'm really pleased to see that the US-Africa Business Summit has aligned the agenda directly with many of the policy innovation dynamics that are currently coming out of the African Union, the AFCFTA, but also African member states. Togo, for instance, the government of Togo has just recently adopted a very ambitious Startup Act. It is the 6th Startup Act on the continent. The African Union itself has developed and adopted its digital transformation agenda. It has developed its policy framework and is seeking to develop a strategy against that. We know that the e-commerce strategy as well as the startup model law are going to be on the agenda for adoption of the Council of Ministers later this year. And just in a few weeks, we'll hopefully see the adoption of the AFCFTA's Digital Trade Protocol. And there are similar, less regulatory, but similar cooperation dynamics happening around energy transition as well. So we're seeing a policy environment where African countries are starting to really shape their own policy environment, are doing so with cooperation partners. And we're seeing at the same time an environment where many American actors are trying to remain relevant and to be included. And on that note, let me come back to AGOA where I started. I think that's why we will also see a continuation of AGOA, probably with some amendments, probably aligned to some of the other GSPs, because it is one of the entry points. And I think we will see it more and more aligned with the African agenda, which is definitely good news for the continent. And I think that's the spirit with which we are all going to be participating in the forum at the summit in Gaborone in July. Thank you.